amidst sun-gilded seashore, salt-washed breeze, and the occasional cacophony of seagulls. A weathered old man drags an equally old and worn dory up and onto a lonely rock in the middle of the cove. He's been looking forward to this moment all day. A chance to get away from everyone and everything. To lose himself in the soothing breath of the tide, as well as his stories. These are stories from the rock. Hi everyone, and welcome to our second episode of Stories from the Rock. For this episode, we'll be continuing the same story we started on our prior episode, Eliza Blackwood and the Secret of Butcher's Cove. If you haven't taken part in our first episode yet, I highly suggest that you do now. Otherwise, the rest of this is only going to amount to a spoiler. Just click on the only other episode that you'll see prior to this one, episode 1. And then you can continue this one, where you'll hear the rest of this story. We last left Eliza Blackwood and Rob Rogers on the tiny island of Grassy Rock. They had been stranded there after their boat had struck a huge rock, and not long after, they discovered that the ring they had tied their boat to was in fact not a mooring ring at all, but the handle of a cellar that held a much deeper secret. Enough recap. Let's dive right in to the second part of Eliza Blackwood and the Secret of Butcher's Cove. Wait, Eliza, you mustn't go down there, mate. You don't know what you'd be breathing in for one. That hole in the ground might be hundreds of years old for all we knows. Judging by the sod and rot, I'd say even older than that, Rob Rogers. And see the iron of this ring. How it's rusted mostly along the handle. It's next to the ocean. It should have rusted far more than that, even after a few decades. But it hasn't. That tells me that it must have been either regularly treated or, yes, the color and pores. The ring was wrought from bog iron. Rob curled his upper lip. Bog iron? Aye, bog iron. The ancient Norse in particular were famous for it. It's very impure, so it doesn't rust as much as other irons, but it's relatively weaker. It's predominantly composed of quartz and geothite when found in swampy bogs, such as the ones that surround Wellington. The Norse would regularly find these nuggets of iron in such bogs, where they'd then be forged in small pits to create iron tools without the need for complex mining operations. This could very well be evidence of a Norse presence on the island of Newfoundland, like they recently found up north. Surely you must have heard of it on the radio or seen it in reports on CBC television. Maid, I'm sorry, but you lost me after you started going on with pints of geoshite. Quartz and geothite, my gentle God, Rob, this is an archaeological discovery. Forget the boat. We got to go down there and see what's inside. It could be a burial cairn or a place where they stored their food. We have to find out, Eliza insisted, driven giddy with discovery. Rob paused and stroked his velvety beard. He tightened his woolen jacket against the growing wind and cursed under his breath. Fine, but I'm unloading your gear first, and we're shooting off one of me flares. We need someone to come get us regardless. These flares is friggin' expensive too, so I'll be writing to your sponsor for reimbursement. First chance I gets. And see if there's a flashlight or something, Eliza called after him, turning her attention to the inky depths of the cellar, swallowing hard. We're going to want light. Scene break. It just keeps going onward. Downward, I mean to say, Rob commented. Deepest cellar I've ever been in, to be sure. I dare say this is much more than a cellar, or cairn, or what have you. It gotta end eventually, right? The two of them were behind the ghostly white glow of an old-fashioned kerosene lamp that Rob possessed in place of a flashlight aboard their ruined boat, typical of his outboard Bayman lifestyle. The winding granite, limestone, and slate staircase was as narrow as a single child could accommodate. Whoever made the spiraling tunnel was smaller than average in comparison to modern humans, which Eliza had once read was likely the case in generations past, when proper nutrition and traits for tallness were both equally hard to come by. The trickling and dripping of water from deep within the downward tunnel could be heard plainly, echoing through the narrow space and betraying the sheer bottomlessness of the passage. "You've lived here your whole life, Rob? How often have you tied that boat to the ring? To think that this passage existed and no one knew of it. It boggles the mind." "That's the way of many things, is it not? Grassy Rock was once a popular spot for rob and reel fishing. There's been plenty of men who've moored their boats on that ring, and before you looks at me with them pretty eyes filled with St. John's venom, women have too, though fewer by a wide margin. Could very well be that it was a slow go, wearing the sod bit by bit over time, and just a licky paper's wit towards ripping up each time, until me heavy boat did her in." "You think my eyes are pretty?" asked Eliza, her face growing hot, along with other parts of her, in pinpricks and tingles. Rob smiled. "I might do wrong by saying, miss, but they're just about the most breathtaking pair of eyes I've ever seen in me entire friggin' life. Swear on me blood. I haven't even seen eyes of three colors before, and the shape of 'em, like calligraphy made flesh." Eliza nearly slipped on the rocks of the steps at the statement. "It's called central heterochromia. My eye colors, I mean. They used to say it was the mark of the witch, back in olden times. But it's merely a Blackwood's trait. And the shape, well, that's obvious. Oh, listen at me ranting on when I could have taken the compliment as the heart-stopping, delicious poetry that it was. Oh, I ruin everything like that. My mother used to say it took me 3 years to speak, and I should have learned to stay quiet." "Your mother sounds like a proper old crone. I would hear you speak well and often," said Rob. "You, Rob Rogers, are a married man. Yet you wear no ring and flirt with school teachers, though I'm not innocent either in that. You're handsome and merited beyond scope, Rob Rogers, I'll gladly say that," offered Eliza, as they shuffled deeper into the dark hole. Rob sighed and cleared his throat in front of her, his grip on the lamp nearly faltering in the wake of Eliza's words. Eliza took note of it without effort and smiled. "I'm a fool," she thought to herself. "What foolishness to explore such things as I'm exploring now with this man." My wife is soon to be an ex-wife. The reason I wear no ring is because she threw hers and mine off the wharf when I told her we were moving to Butcher's Cove, and that I'd sold what I could sell to open the store on the hill. 'Twas half hers, she said, and she cursed me. I suppose when all is done, that'll be true. But 'twasn't true at the time, and it ain't true yet. Elizabeth Abigail Blackwood, first chance you get, you are to kiss this man. He's yours." "I'm sorry to hear of your impending divorce, Mr. Rogers." Abruptly, Rob turned around and gave Eliza a wicked half-grin. "Are you?" Eliza stared into the dark eyes and broke into goose flesh. No, not even a lip, and his lips were on her. First, on her lips, where they lingered to melt into them with a primal taste of tobacco, molasses, and a human lust as old as time. Next, they went to the liminal spaces between her throat and neck, almost expertly, sending shivers through her like the aftermath of a shot of whiskey. Oh, sighed Eliza, as her hands moved to the lush of Rob's hair, grasping. Rob's lips moved to her ear, where his soft, close beard rubbed her earlobe before his teeth did, and he whispered, Eliza, may I be so bold as to take you here on these... Yes, breathed Eliza, breathless. Rob smiled, and the flame of the lamp leapt higher. Whether from the downward climb on the narrow steps, or from the most racking cluster of pleasures that Eliza had ever experienced, Eliza's legs were like rubber as they wobbled at the knees with every step down the passageway. Her face was flushed, her blood was strong, and her mind sharper than it ever was in the wake of their primal tryst. It was wonderful. Eliza Blackwood, that was well worth whatever morals you bent in doing so. The two intrepid explorers held hands tenderly as they descended, occasionally rubbing each other's tender hand muscles with their thumbs to remind each other of their presence in the enigmatic and strange way that only came to new lovers, holding hands. A mixture of awkwardness and soothing reassurance in the wake of whatever their worrisome thoughts would conjure from the imagined perspective of the other. Eliza, my love, I think we're reaching the bottom at last. I can see some light reflecting back at us, if that makes sense. It's soft, but it's there. Eliza knew that much already. From childhood, she'd noticed that her senses were always higher than others, sometimes painfully so, or blurring things together in her mind and making it hard for her to think straight. The sounds came quicker to her now as they went deeper. The air felt heavier on her skin and deep within her ears. Just as Rob mentioned, she had noticed minutes ago that the light was indeed coming back to them from somewhere below, a soft graying of the darkness that perforated the fringes of their halo of the kerosene lamp. I think you're right, said Eliza, more to give her man of the night a false measure of bravado in his leadership. And well that it's so. Any deeper, and we'd risk running into pockets of gas in the earth. With a flame ahead of us, that could be disastrous. Even without a flame, those gases could be fatal. Coal miners in the past would often carry canaries in cages as the only way to detect poisonous gas. Because the birds was trained to sing if they sensed the gas? Asked Rob. No, because they'd die. They'd know the gas was there when the birds stopped singing. Their tiny respiratory systems would metabolize the poison before a miner would. The coal miners would then have mere seconds to escape the gas pocket upon noticing the dead canary, or they'd meet the same fate as their bird. Huh. Smart, replied Rob. Eliza was slightly taken aback by that cold comment, but she reminded herself that she wasn't in St. John's anymore. It was easy to bemoan animal exploitation in a city of cars, trucks, and indoor plumbing, but elsewhere on the island, people lived or died for centuries based on hard work, hard luck, and taking advantage of whatever they could to survive their own exploitation by other human beings, merchant ships, crooked politicians, local moguls, and landlords. The people of Newfoundland provided an overabundance of hard work that went to lining the pockets of affluent men in the city, or even elsewhere, across the ocean. Rob likely witnessed grown men beating horses to near death to pull a stack of wood, that would see their children through the cold of winter. Could she truly judge him for not caring about the life of a tiny bird in a potentially lethal coal mine? An odd shudder passed through her. "Rob, wait!" cried Eliza, suddenly caught by the meager light reflecting strangely from the dark slate of the wall. "There's something of interest. Bring about the light." Rob stopped and did as he was told, swinging the kerosene lamp to the slate. "It's just tool marks from the digging through the rock, isn't it?" No, these marks are in many directions. Turn up the lamp, if you'd please." Rob guffawed. "My sweetheart says it sweetly this time." He turned the small brass dial on the side of the lamp, and Eliza gasped. "They're runes! Viking runes!" she shouted, taking the lamp from her lover and illuminating all around them while twirling. "Countless runes! I've never even seen some of them before. This one means October, I think. It starts with W. I remember that much. This rune means blood. This one means moon. Rob, I was right. This is an undiscovered Viking archaeological site." "Hold on. I knows you're so smart as a whip, but there's no friggin' way you can read what's on these walls. That much you're making up." "I never said I could read the runes, Robert Rogers. Only that I know the meaning of some of them. I spent much of my childhood reading books by myself. My father would buy books for me each week if I behaved well. Oh, and I hadn't a strong urge for friendship." "My good God, do you ever stop talking?" said Rob, suddenly cross. "Eliza, you silly creature. This man grew up poor, and you're bragging of weekly presents of books from a father who spoiled you. Books read for fun rather than education. Rob, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." In the light of the lamp, Rob's face was a mask of odd feelings that Eliza couldn't read. "No, Elizabeth Abigail Blackwood of St. John's. I'm the one who's sorry." Rob's eyes looked to Eliza's right, over her shoulder, and far behind her. "Rob, what are you—" Footsteps behind her. "No." And the next thing that Eliza Blackwood sensed was a blow to the back of her head. First, the sound of trickling water. What? Where? Second, the creeping and exponentially rising cold, allowing her mind to draw the form of her body against the pervasive blackboard of nothingness. When? How? And third, a voice that thrust Eliza's mind forward from the murk of her sleep. "Make sure it's tight. We don't know how strong she truly is. I doubt even she." Eliza's eyes flew open, and she instantly regretted it. The sharp stabbing pain of multiple kerosene lanterns lanced her eyes like toothpicks driven by hammers. She painfully beheld the lit chamber that she was now inside. Yellow nylon ropes securing her wrists and ankles to iron rings lodged deep within a slab of what was almost certainly slate bedrock. She screamed. "Help me! Help! Help me, please!" Rob sighed. "Of course she's awake already, frig's sakes." "You want me to knock her out again, or what?" a familiar voice asked. "I still got a friggin' headache from what she did to me. I'd be only too glad to give her another smack." "How about you shows her some respect instead, Belv?" said Rob. "We're treating her rough enough as it is. And as far as I'm concerned, you got what you deserved when she—" "You simply will untie me, "And you will do so immediately," said Elira, suddenly more furious than she had ever thought possible. "Or I swear to God, rope or no, I will render both of you blind, deaf, and even dumber than you are now. You will both spend the rest of your lives in a darkness and cold even thicker than this. Your lives will be naught but terror, sorrow, and regret. I'll break my bones to do it. She felt something collide with her jaws. "Cousin, do that again, and I'll strap you to it. I almost wants to do that now." Eliza winced as Hunt loomed over her, smiling with his disgusting false teeth. She vibrated the back of her throat and abruptly spit a mixture of blood and phlegm into the man's face. Hunt roared and disappeared from her vision, but in the light of the lanterns, she saw Robert Rogers smile, the same smile she fell in love with hours earlier. Her mind raced from adrenaline, and as a side effect, she began to unravel what was happening and why. "You greedy bastard. It's the house, isn't it?" Rob lowered his eyebrows and raised his mouth in an oddly level smile. "Come again?" "The papers have all been signed. The funds have been deposited to your bank. If I were to die, there's no will and testament to pass on that property that I purchased from you. You insisted that our contract of sale state that the estate would return to you in the event of any disruption to the ownership transfer process, including ambiguity of occupancy and ownership. My father's solicitors laughed at it, dismissed it as a typical Bay-Naughty mistrust of what they lacked the ability to understand. They allowed it in the contract as an idle platitude of an ignorant simpleton. But it was by design. You'd own the house and the property in Butcher's Cove and keep the money at the same time. My father's solicitors would fight you on it. But by then, the laws surrounding resettlement would muddle things to the point where such a battle wouldn't be worth the effort and money involved. You'd get the house, the property, the money paid, and you could win back your precious wife at the same time." Eliza became aware that the walls of the chamber were absolutely covered in thumbnail-sized Viking runes, but it was a tangent that her mind couldn't afford. Another thought surfaced. The crab in the tide pool. You've done this before as well. What that crab was eating. A swirled image of graying flesh entered her mind more starkly than before. Was a human ear. Hunt guffawed. "She's right clever, ain't she? School teacher, she says." Rob grinned and gave a slow clap. "What's the saying again, Belvedere? Seen it in that movie with the spies in it. Close, but no cigar." Eliza could have raked his eyes out. Eyes she used to adore. "You're a serial murderer. I can't believe..." Revulsion lanced through her as the reality of what she'd done with Rob truly set in. "Oh my God, I can't believe I let you touch me, let alone..." Eliza paused as another thought slammed into her mind. "Back when we met, and I shook your hand, it was calloused from years of hard labor. You don't bother to use gloves when you're working with your hands. You never once used them while rowing either. Male ego takes pride in their calluses, in simple areas such as these. You had those gloves on your person because you planned this from the start. You didn't want to leave your fingerprints." "Boy, how can someone so smart be so stupid?" "That's what happens when you fills a mind with science," said Hunt, practically vomiting the last words in hyperbolic disgust. Eliza's mortal fear and anger turned to insane laughter. "Science is what's gonna do you in, boys. You think modern forensics stops at fingerprints? Oh, It's the 60s, you idiots. Once they find this place, the police will... The police will... Now it was the murderer's turn to laugh. I already told you, Eliza. Cops is very far away from here. Clovertown, to be exact. About so far as Gander. And they already aren't exactly the brightest bulbs on the tree either. They'd be elsewhere otherwise. They wants to do so little as they can and then go home. That's rural Newfoundland. St. John's cops got no jurisdiction here either, explained Rob Rogers. But you're still so very friggin' wrong about what's going on. You'll know soon enough. But if it'll keep your mouth quiet, try to keep your sharp mind open and think about all we've discussed. Rob nodded to his cousin. Get the moon in here. It's time. From the slanted slab of rock she was tied to, Eliza heard a scraping of rock against stone, and the full October moon appeared high above her head despite the fact that the three of them were likely hundreds of feet below grassy rock. Eliza was now truly confused. What is this? What's going on here? She pleaded, growing more afraid by the minute. Oh, for frig's sake, Blackwood, think! What moment did I don the gloves? What is it you think that I didn't want to touch? Fingerprints don't matter. Cops here don't even bother with forensics. They just want to go home at the end of the day. The gloves! When did I put 'em on? Eliza struggled against her ropes as she thought. When you were mooring the boat to the iron ring. Yes! And who tied you to the same bog iron rings on that slab? It wasn't me. The flare wasn't for help, but for Hunt. Hunt tried... He tried to get me on these rings. But why? I don't know what you're talking about. Iron is everywhere. It's in your blood. You're not allergic. What are you, a fairy? A witch? Eliza bawled, laughing at her own joke. Rob didn't laugh, but he smiled. You finally understand. Not all iron is sacred, to be sure, but my people forged that iron from the magic of the bog. Both of my people. The Vikings who came here close to 1,000 years ago, and the Beotic, who they bred with thereafter. Eliza could only stare at the man she had fallen in love with earlier that night, her mind reeling, her fear rising, her eyes welling, her thoughts racing. No, it can't be. It's impossible. Hunt laughed loudly. She thinks it's impossible. She don't know, poor maid. She truly has no idea who she is. What she is, agreed Rob, whose snark was so palpable that it could be cut with a butter knife. Robert Rogers lit a rolled cigarette and strode towards her, blowing smoke down into her upturned face as he loomed like a sword of Damocles. You see, Eliza, our friends from the Cove wasn't just Beothuk, but Norse as well. A pocket population held in the fault of these cliffs, a merged village of Viking and native blood. Skreelings, me Viking ancestors called them when they met. But in this village, what would become Wellington, the two managed to actually get along with each other, breed with each other. In time, the new people were ostracized by the others around them, but they didn't care. They stuck to themselves here in the Cove, secluded from everyone, until the Europeans came again, this time from England. An enemy to both ancestral bloodlines of this Cove. When the English came, the conflict was brutal. There was disease, and both sides had spellcasters, witches on the side of the English and Schutt shamans on the side of Wellington. It got bad, Eliza, for both sides. And so, to avoid mutual destruction, a deal was struck. But it wasn't just a deal of mutual respect and cooperation, no, but one of mutual fear. They had more powerful weapons on the English side, true, but much more fearsome and terrible magic on the side of the Viking Beotic. Spells and spirits that even English witches had never encountered before, drawing their power from the earth, sea, and sky, just as the English did. Only their magic was still wild and pure, their connection to the land still strong. But soon, the English found a way to match that power. "Sacrifice?" asked Eliza, remembering the ear in the tide pool. "Yes, smart. But that's not what we'll be doing with you, Eliza. Oh, we've something else in mind for you. But more history before we get sidetracked. In the end, that deal was also proved to be an armistice of sorts. Their spirits and their land were theirs, and our spirits and land were ours. The English, I mean. For as I said, me own roots is tangled, so that no further blood would be spilt between settlers and natives, coven and tribe. But with the resettlement, that deal has been broken. You aren't on your islands anymore. You're being forced by the Canadian government to move to this cove, finished Eliza, staring now at the full moon above. Rob clapped his hands together and laughed. Yes, she gets it! Eliza's sense of reason returned like a blow to her head. You're mad. Crazy. You're insane. There's no such thing as anything you're speaking about. You're mad. You're gone. No. Eliza Amelia Blackwood of St. John's. I'm a double-blooded witch of Butcher's Cove and Bragg's Island, and until sunrise, by way of pact and blood, so are you, screamed Rob Rogers, maniacally, his dark eyes wild in the pale light of the moon and kerosene. There was a hissing sound to her left, and Eliza turned her head to see Rob clutching the bog-iron ring that secured her wrist, where his hand was glowing orange with an ethereal heat that burned him. With a wince, he brought his tumbling, injured hand away and examined it with ire. He smirked then, closed his eyes, and began whispering an unintelligible, silky mantra. Within seconds, the now raw flesh of his burned hand began to knit together before Eliza's eyes, until the wound was completely healed, the dank air perfumed with the smell of copper. Eliza reeled as tears scraped the moorings of her eyes. You say I'm not a sacrifice, then why make sacrifices? And what am I supposed to be? Why am I on this slab? Rob laughed, and a fireball the size of an egg suddenly erupted from the upturned palm of his once burned hand, suspended in place as if it were a small sun under his godlike control. In the light of Rob's fire, countless bones became visible inside the space that they now occupied. Femurs, skulls, hands, feet, and fibulas dotted every inch of the floor. Eliza screamed. You see, Eliza, these are the ones who were sacrificed, one every year on this night under the full October moon. Their blood, it slowly fed a spell to be activated on this very night. For this night was prophesied long ago, and my people have been preparing. Preparing for what? Why am I tied to the slab if not for sacrifice? Rob suddenly became angry. For the love of God, woman, let me talk and you'll find out. This spell was designed to grant all the power of every witch and soot shaman that ever came before in this cove and on these islands to one person. A chosen one who would free the entire island of Newfoundland from their oppressors and exploiters. The time has come, Eliza. I am that chosen one, a witch of both bloodlines, Viking and Beothic, one who has foot in the islands and in the cove, just as the prophecy foretold. The very prophecy carved into these walls, Eliza. But the magic is powerful. The magic is dangerous. And so you, Eliza gasped. I'm your canary. Aren't I, Rob? This whole time, I've just been a canary to test the spell that your murderous ancestors made on this island between worlds. Rob only smiled. A witch's powers are awakened from hardship and trauma. You've lived a coddled life, Eliza. Your powers are dormant and perhaps even weak, like the respiratory system of a damn canary. Your powers... You are a witch, though. You are, Eliza Blackwood. A mixed breed witch like me. You felt it, didn't you? Hell, you probably still feels it even now. We're of the same magic. You're the same as me. I'm nothing like you, spat Eliza. I'm not a cold-blooded murderer. Sacrifice is a moral sacrifice, as well as one of the flesh, Elizabeth Blackwood. Cousin, begin the ritual before Epona the moon moves away. No, Eliza screamed. This is a dream, an hallucination. Call the corners, Belv. Place your hand on Eliza's head, and your other hand on mine. If something goes wrong, remove your hand from me, Rob ordered his cousin, who obeyed him. Don't touch me, Eliza bawled as she struggled, but to no avail. Belvedere Hunt began a low and thrumming chant, and to Elizabeth's horror, the runes on the walls began to glow the same ghostly white as the moon above her head. She cried louder. It's working, Rob screamed, laughing as the rune light whirled with the moonlight and swirled around the chamber, around Eliza and Rob. Keep chanting, Belv. Louder. Let the corners hear ya. Let Epona hear ya. Let Frigg hear ya. Louder. The bones on the floor rattled, jaws chattering, ribs chittering, the balls of bone beating against stone like a dark drum. Eliza felt a heat in her stomach that radiated like a warmth of a slowly stoked fire. Despite her fear, it felt incredible, Eliza shouted, turning giddy. What is this? To think this exists, that such power actually exists, that this power isn't yours, Robert Rogers of Bragg's Island. Eliza focused the heat to her wrists, and the yellow nylon melted like butter. She focused the heat to her ankles, where the nylon did the same. Eliza smiled. No, Rob cried out, his eyes like black saucers. No, Belv, stop! It's mine! The scream was earth-shattering. Belvedere Hunt indeed stopped his relentless chanting, not to obey his cousin, but to cover his ears against the ear-splittingly loud sound of Eliza's keening. She rose, her hair floating around her as if underwater. She didn't rise by way of her own body, but by way of her own mind, floating in midair as if gravity were a suggestion rather than a law. Eliza smiled and slowly rotated to face the man she knew this night as stranger, lover, and captor all. To Elizabeth Abigail Blackwood of St. John's, he looked like a frightened child. "This can't be! This can't be! You're not the chosen one! You're a proxy! A conduit for safety! I did everything right! I did it by the letter! By the way I was taught me whole life! I did everything right!" he screamed, aghast by what he was beholding. Eliza threw her head back and laughed as she snapped Belvedere Hunt's wide neck from somewhere behind her, able to feel everything around her as if it were rubbing against her skin. "Aye, you are right, Rob, but wrong as well. I lied when I said I couldn't read the runes. Only a handful of people can, and I'm one of them. I can read them better than you, it seems. The spell indeed is meant for a double-blooded witch of Butcher's Cove and the islands. You must own property on both lands. The house on Bragg's Island yet to be delivered, and the land upon which it will come to rest. Make that true. For me. You're not a double-blooded witch either, Rob. You said so yourself, that there were witches on the English side, and Rogers is an English surname. You've one too many, Robert Rogers, the triple-blooded witch. My Japanese magic blood and my Scottish magic in my veins runs along with the ownership of both properties, and it makes me the true target of this prophecy. I am the double-blooded witch. I am the chosen one. I will bring about what is to come for Newfoundland, not you, boomed Eliza in a voice that belonged to thousands rather than one. No, it can't be. It can't, was all that Rob managed to say before Eliza released an inferno of white fire from her hands. As the rune light faded and blinked from the walls, so too did the power that Eliza felt fade from her control, and the consciousness that controlled it wavered too, until Elizabeth Abigail Blackwood of Bragg's Island, Butcher's Cove, and St. John's fell very abruptly asleep and collapsed to the bone-strewn floor of the chamber that held the secret of Butcher's Cove. Scene break. Caleb Oram steered the boat well, he thought, as he putted his motorboat toward the large white two-story house that once belonged to his bachelor rogue of a cousin. He wished that he had Rob's luck with the women. Maybe then he wouldn't have had to marry that bore of a wife he had. No, Key Oram. She's a good woman. Don't think like that. She may not be pretty as she once was, but she keeps your house in line and your bed warm at night. She might not be so pretty as she once was, but she's still... And his heart stopped. There on the shores of Grassy Rock, next to his cousin's ruined boat, was a black-haired beauty the likes of which Caleb had never seen before in his 50 years. Holy frig now, that's a friggin' sight. Holy frig, he thought with a smile as he stoked the pipe that he held between his now grinning teeth. The woman turned to him, no doubt hearing his engine coming. One of Rob's, he thought, but Rob himself was nowhere to be seen. The man blinked, and the woman on the shore disappeared as if she were but a trick of the mind. Key's pipe dropped from his mouth and sent burning embers along his lap. He cursed as he wiped them away. And from the window behind him, he heard a voice cry out, "Hey, you there! Keep it down. This is my house, and I need some sleep. Caleb whipped his head around to see the woman from the shore glaring at him from the top bedroom window of the floating house, as if he were somehow an intruder on her land. He was about to protest when a look in her multicolored crescent eyes sent such a strong shiver down his spine that he bit his tongue both figuratively and literally, tasting blood. "Sorry, miss," said Key, swallowing hard. "I'll keep it quiet from here on out." The most powerful witch on earth smiled as she shut her window. "Good boy." And that is the conclusion of Eliza Blackwood and the Witches of Butcher's Cove. It's a story that I wrote 10 years ago while I was still in college. Much like Elizabeth Blackwood, I was funneled down a career path that wasn't quite for me. I'm an openly autistic man, and being a chef was full of slings and arrows that I'd rather not get into right now. I always wanted to be a writer instead. And like Eliza, I discovered my true power much later in life. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Join us next Friday for more stories from the Rock.